Welcome everybody. My name is Virginia and I am a social worker. I work for Headspace and ALA. I've been working in the early intervention mental health space for about 12 years, working internationally and locally here in Brisbane. It's an area I feel really passionate about and I'm really excited to share some of that with you guys today. So what I want to talk about initially is just kind of setting the scene around what is mental health, mental illnesses, get into a little bit about what that might look like in the workplace, and then what we can all do to help. So the word mental health gets used really regularly, and there's a bit of a misconception about what mental health is. So the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes their own ability, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. So as you can see, the term mental health is so much more than just the absence of a mental illness. It really thinks about a person as a whole. So then what is a mental health concern? So there's three things that we think about when a concern around mental health is developing. So we think about major changes in a person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. And those changes start causing a pretty significant disruption to their day-to-day functioning. So their ability to do things that we would normally expect them to do. So maybe engaging in their hobbies, going to school, going to work, having really meaningful relationships. And all of these changes don't go away as quickly as they should. Now that's a really important one, because what we need to acknowledge is that when our mental health isn't great, that doesn't necessarily mean we have a mental illness, because we all have days where we don't feel really good. So that's why we talk about the mental health continuum. So mental health is one end of the continuum where we feel really mentally healthy, we feel really able to cope with what's going on in life, and we're feeling good. The other end of the continuum is when we have a really severe mental illness. And on any given day, we could be anywhere up and down that continuum. So if I've had really bad sleep for a couple of days, I've had a fight with my boyfriend, and I've got a deadline at work, I might be feeling pretty stressed. I might be a little bit further down that continuum and not be feeling that great about life. But we make up, I've had a good sleep, the deadline's passed, and I'm back down the other end again. So it's really normal for us to fluctuate. But what we want to do is make sure that when people are moving up that continuum, we get in early to help them build up some of those factors to help them move back down the other end again. So setting the context about mental health in Australia is a really important one, because there's a lot of stigma around mental health, and I want to make sure we're all aware of how common it is. So 1 in 5 Australians aged 16 to 85 experience a mental illness in any given year. So if you look around your workplace today, there is a really high chance that people around you have a diagnosed mental illness, but we can't see that. Young people are less likely than any other age group to seek professional help. Now that's a real worry for us in our industry, especially because over 75% of mental health problems actually start before the age of 25. So if they're not seeking professional help, or people aren't noticing that they're not well, they're going to get more unwell, and that's going to have an impact for the rest of their life. Now, a really big statistic, which is quite staggering, which people don't realise, is that suicide is the leading cause of death for people aged 25 to 44. So that's why it is so important that we all have some knowledge about this area and we all feel like we can do something. So with young people, the most common mental illnesses that they experience are depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, and substance misuse disorders. And quite often, those three occur at the same time. So let's jump into looking at what depression and anxiety might look like in young people. So depression lasts for at least 2 weeks, and it affects a person's emotions, thinking, behaviour, and their physical well-being. So it affects the whole person. And it starts impacting their ability to work, study, and have really meaningful relationships. So how might we notice that a young person in our workplace might be experiencing depression or is showing early signs of depression. So what you might notice is the young person has a really unusually sad or irritable mood, and that it's out of character. You might notice that they've stopped engaging in their usual hobbies, studying or spending time with friends. So you might notice that after work they talk to you about just going home to sleep, that they've stopped playing sport, that actually they don't see so much of their friends anymore, and that might start to worry you. You might also notice a real lack of energy, so they might look really flat, exhausted or tired. They might even talk to you about the fact that they sleep too much or they're not sleeping at all. So that would make us start to get a bit worried as well. Another thing you might notice is that there is this sense of guilt, and they might be apologising a lot. And this is really disproportionate to the situation that they're in. So they might be apologising for things that are not their fault, and they might be ruminating a lot on that kind of guilt around that. You might notice them making comments about wishing they were dead. You might think this is a throwaway comment, but it's really important to keep an eye out for this. They also might have difficulty concentrating or making decisions, and that can probably feel a little bit frustrating as an employer, but it's really important to think about what might be going on if this is a change in character for a young person. You might also physically see them changing, so you might see a lot of weight loss or even weight gain and changes in their appetite. So they might be skipping lunch breaks, they might be coming to work and saying they didn't have time for breakfast, or you might notice they're overeating, which is also really common. So snacks at their desks, eating much more than they usually do. So these are all really common signs that a young person might be experiencing depression. So anxiety. Now I want you to know that anxiety is actually really normal, and anxiety is actually helpful for us in a lot of different ways. So anxiety can vary from that kind of mild uneasiness that we feel, maybe before we have to speak in front of a large group of people, before we have a difficult conversation. So those feelings are really normal, and they actually help us to perform at our very best. But anxiety can go all the way through to a full-blown panic attack. Now, an anxiety disorder differs from normal anxiety in the sense that it's more severe, it's long-lasting, and it interferes with a person's life. So it can be really debilitating. So what might we notice in the workplace if a young person is developing an anxiety disorder? So you might notice a lot of avoidance or distress in certain situations, which has kind of come out of the blue. So a young person may say that they don't want to do anything front of house. They might not want to be engaging with customers anymore. They would rather be out the back where they don't have to talk to people. You might notice an employee doesn't want to do speeches anymore. They find it really too much or distressing to stand up in front of a big group of people. And you might actually physically see that distress. So you might see them panicking, they might need to remove themselves, you might see changes in their breathing. So this is a really good sign that certain situations are creating anxiety for them. You might also notice that they have a sense of like really unrealistic fear or worry about certain situations. That might not always be about work. You might hear them talking about the fact that they're really worried that they haven't heard from their parents today because they might be dead. They might have died in a car accident. And that might feel really strange to you, but that's very real for that young person who has some anxiety around something bad happening. You also might start noticing that they get a bit forgetful, or they might not be able to focus. So when a person's experiencing really high anxiety, their brain is so full of that worry and that fear that just focusing on everyday tasks can get really difficult. And again, this is one of those things that could be quite frustrating as an employer if your staff member can't focus. You might notice some indecisiveness. So some of that worry and fear makes them not trust themselves and trust their instinct about good decision making. You also might notice them getting irritable, impatient, or anger. And sometimes these are the gender differences we see in the expression of anxiety. So we see that young boys or males are more likely to show that kind of anger side of things. And again, that's because there is kind of an impatience with themselves and they feel worried, and the only way they can express that is being angry with other people. You might notice confusion, nervousness, and again, tiredness, because the mental fatigue of that worry can be a lot for a young person. Again, acknowledging that these might be really difficult things as an employer to have to manage on a day-to-day basis when you really want your staff to be achieving and being efficient. But what I really want you to do is take a step back and have a think, I wonder what's going on here. This is unusual for my employee, and I really want to have a think about what could be going on for them right now and how I can help. And the good news is we can all help. And I just want to really reassure everyone that it is not a scary thing to help someone who might be experiencing mental health concern. And that's because all people need often is to be seen and acknowledged and understood. So what I really want to encourage you to do is tell the young person, you've noticed they've changed, and maybe nothing's going on for them, but to be really seen by someone is important. So just acknowledge that, hey, you look really worried, you look a bit tired, you're not yourself. I've noticed that you're not doing things that you used to love doing. Just checking in. And that's really nice for any of us. When you think about that continuum, if I'm having a bad day, I might not necessarily have a mental illness, but if my colleague says, hey Virginia, are you all right? You don't seem yourself. I'm going to be like, oh, you know what? Yes, I had a really bad sleep last night and I'm feeling a bit frustrated, but thank you so much for checking in on me. So there is never any harm just to check in to see if someone's okay. The next thing you can do is just be available to talk. And talking doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a therapist or a counsellor, and you're not going to say the wrong thing. It's just about saying, I'm here to listen. And when you're listening, it's really important just to validate the experience they have. Acknowledge that what they're feeling is actually really difficult, and you're really sorry that that's happening for them. And the next part is actually doing something with that information. And it's really simple, because recommending a young person see their GP is a really simple thing to do. And GPs are the ones who can triage young people to work out what's going on for them and which professional might be the best person to help. And then that helps you feel like you've done something and you've handed over that responsibility to someone who can help at that next level. And everybody has access to a GP. Now, some things that we really don't want you to do, and these are really hard, and I just want to acknowledge that if you have a young person in your life as an employer, as a parent, as a friend, it is really hard to do these things sometimes, but it's really important to catch yourself. So what we don't want to do is tell someone to just get over it, just toughen up, because that is going to increase the self-stigma. So a young person is going to feel worse about themselves for experiencing what they're experiencing, and they're less likely to ask for help from someone else. So please don't behave or give the message that it's something that's easy to get over. If someone had a broken leg, we wouldn't say, just get on with it. We'd be like, wow, that looks really painful and I'm really sorry that's happening. You should definitely take a sick day and go and get some help. So make sure we treat everybody with mental health concerns the same as physical health concerns. The other thing is that young people thrive off belonging and having that connection and being part of a community. So a workplace is actually a really great place for a young person to feel like they belong. And it's a really helpful part of their identity formation, that they're contributing, giving back to society, and that will help their mental health. So if you exclude them or if you punish them when it's something that is going to help their mental health, that could have even more of an impact. Now, I acknowledge that if you have someone who cannot come to work and work fruitfully, then it's going to be difficult to keep encouraging them to come back. But rather than seeing it as a negative by telling them, we don't want you here, it's more about saying, hey, maybe things are hard at the moment. If you get some help, we're here whenever you need us. The next thing, and I really, really encourage you, is please do not ignore your worries. If you have sensed something isn't okay, and you have that feeling inside you that something's changed, please talk to the young person about it. Because if you've noticed, chances are something is going on. If you know that that young person has someone in their life who can help, a parent, a friend, a partner, you might want to share it with them as well. But please don't ignore your worries.